Come on in. Thank you guys for coming to our first community listening session, input session. Um, Tonight is a very important step. I see some familiar faces in here tonight that were a part of our facility master planning committee. So thank you for being a part of that committee. Um, Tonight, we are going to share with you where we've been and where we are going. By the way, my name is TJ Schneckloth. I'm the very proud superintendent of Davenport Community School District. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. So tonight, we are going to share with you where we've been and where we propose we are going. In the Davenport Community School District, in terms of our facilities, we haven't made a major investment in all of our facilities in a long time. And we've been upkeeping our facilities, making sure that our students have what we need. But now's the time to set the future for the district. And nothing's more important than that than seeking community input. So as you can see, we have the way that we're set up here today is to be very collaborative with your people. So if you are by yourself at a table and you're comfortable with going to another table where you could have table conversations, that would be great. You'll notice that we have one of the things that's really important for us is to get feedback from tonight, because you're going to hear from one of our board members next. That's critical for us. So tonight really is an opportunity for us to get input from our community, which is critically important to us, and help inform how we're going to move forward. The Davenport Schools has partnered with Bray architecture firm, and we have been incredibly impressed with the work that they've done. And tonight, John Mayen's going to lead us through this session today. They've done an outstanding job, and the main portions of their work come from schools. And so they do a lot of work with schools in the Midwest, and they actually have an office here in town. And so we are incredibly lucky to have them. Very impressed with the work that they put in. So tonight is going to be a long night with lots of information coming at you. We are also live streaming, aren't we? We are live streaming this, so it'll be recorded. So for tonight, anybody with, yeah, that's right, Bruce. Tighten it up there. So we will be redoing this meeting again, same content on August 25th. So for anybody that couldn't make it tonight, can watch it online. We also have a tab on our website that everything that we've done to this point is on the website. We're going to post this meeting on the website. So it's kind of a clearinghouse of all of the information to help to be as transparent as possible. I'm going to throw out a statistic for this room at the sense of urgency that we have. Over the last 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, we have not right-sized, closed buildings, done things that we needed to do in this district. The most recent demography study that we got, anywhere from 3,500 to 5,000 open seats in our district right now. If the district were being run by a company, the very first thing they would do is close a plant. And I'll tell you the reasons why that's critically important for us. The dollars it takes for us to run a school building is anywhere from $350,000, just power lights and stuff, $350,000 to $1 million, depending upon the size of the building. Now you think about the programming, the things that we could do inside of our district if those dollars were back into the coffers for the district. And so we know that we have very difficult decisions ahead of us to make, but I'm also very optimistic. I envision state-of-the-art CTE programs that are providing excellent opportunities for our students. We have early literacy opportunities for our students. We have beautiful buildings and facilities that allow our students to have pride and safe environments. And so I know that that's the direction that we need to head. And in order to do that, we have to make difficult decisions. And we won't do that in a silo. One of the things that our board, cabinet, we're committed to being as transparent as possible. And so I want to thank you on behalf of the Davenport School District and the board for coming tonight to give your feedback, because it's absolutely critically important to us. And so I've asked Bruce Potts to say a few words on behalf of the board. We have another school board member here today, just one more, Kent Poston in the back. He's a part of our finance committee. Bruce sits on a long-range facility planning committee meeting that meets every other week. It's a school board administrative team meeting, and we found that to be very effective mode of operating for us. So Bruce, thank you for saying a few words to the group tonight. You ready to do that? The people online might not be able to hear you.
What? We had no plan as to where we knew we needed to go someplace, but we didn't have a plan in the can. We wanted those people to understand that. It wasn't like they were going to work and work and work and work, produce something, and then we were going to go, well, we had this idea already. The only goal we have is that the plan that we wind up with produces good quality education for the kids in our town. That's the overriding goal. And we need input from the community. Because if we just decide in the school, if we just decide next week, oh, we're going to do plan A, I'm going to be in high B tomorrow, and somebody's going to rip my face off. Because you didn't get anybody to ask me nothing, you just decided, you already knew what you were going to do. We don't. We have two options that we've been given by the planning group. Your input on giving us advice on what to do in this meeting, the subsequent meeting, and we're doing a complete community survey, mailed to every address in the district to get feedback. Because when we make this decision, we want the community to know we listened, we made a decision based on input, and a decision in the best interest of the kids in this district. And that's what it's all about. That's why you are here. And that's why we're here to listen. So, you need to listen for a bit now, and then you're going to give us feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Give Bruce a round of applause. Thank you so much. So at your table, this is going to be the way that we record who is here tonight, but also we're going to have opportunities for share outs. But if your ideas, thoughts, questions, comments, or concerns are not shared out publicly, then we want to make sure that we grab them. Danielle Heller, the magnificent, wonderful, will be gathering all of these today. So you can just leave them on your table and we'll gather them. So that's really, really important to us that we want to know who's here. And also, if we have to get back to you for some reason in an urgent fashion, that allows us to do that. But also, we're going to gather these comments and questions. There's a comment section on our website. Every Friday, we download that, we review them, and every one of our board members has read every comment that comes to the website as well. So this is really important to us. With that being said, I'd like to bring up John. John, again, works for Bray Architecture firm. Is it engineering and architecture? Just architects, all right. And so he has a lot of experience in this arena, has done a fantastic job. So John, thanks for being here with us and leading us tonight.
All right. Danielle, if you wouldn't mind putting the agenda up. So as TJ said, I'm John Mann with Bray Architects. I have lived and worked in the Davenport portion of the Quad Cities for 30 years. Being a resident of Davenport, 4 of my children are graduates of Davenport schools. So for anyone who's a parent in the district, I understand what it's like to hear the messaging from the parent side. Coming from my professional background, I look at this with my experiential eyes. And so What that means is we're going to have a lengthy bit of agenda, but part of this is to give the group that's participating tonight the ability to understand the steps that have been taken and the information that has been considered by the district that influences the decision-making of how to go forward. When we get to later in the presentation, it will talk about considerations for ways that the district is starting to look at how to move forward. These are not set in stone. These are first shots out of the gate at trying to establish a plan. The goal is to get as much feedback from community members. We'll talk about those different groups that have been participating. Community members like yourselves are integral to this process because it helps us understand how to make the right recommendations for the board to consider when moving forward. So just to give you a little bit of background, if we want to jump forward, there is 530 acres of property owned by Davenport Schools, which is a phenomenal amount of property, and 39 buildings in the district that are owned by Davenport Schools. 29 of the 39 are educational facilities, whether early learning centers, high schools, elementaries, junior highs. The remaining 10 buildings are used for storage, administration, or operations. It's not a small amount of real estate that the district is dealing with. If we jump forward, all of that we just talked about is charted on a map. So the darker portion of the map is the boundary of Davenport School District. Davenport School District expands across multiple jurisdictions, meaning it's part of the city of Davenport, part of the city of Walcott, Bluegrass, and Buffalo, as well as unincorporated areas which are part of Scott County. So the amount of area that encompasses Davenport schools is quite large, which also means it services a tremendous amount of students. If we want to jump forward. So of the 29 education centers, we have 17 elementary schools, which are pre-K through 6th grade, 1 K through 8, so kindergarten through 8th grade school, 4 junior high schools, which operate as 7th grade and 8th grade buildings, 3 high schools, 9 through 12, 1 specialized high school, which is our mid-city high school. We actually, not shown on this list, have 3 children's village campuses as well, which handle preschool functions. This process, I'm going to come back to this schedule in a minute. This process started in August of 2021. We are a year into this process and likely have, several months yet to go. I'm going to talk through some of the steps of what this past year has entailed. Back in June of 2021, the district understood that it needed to create a long-range master plan. It was coming off of the accreditation with the state, with budgetary reviews and concerns, and knew that something needed to be done to help chart a better course for the district. In August of 2021, the district participated in interviews with consulting firms. Our firm, Bray Architects, was selected. We actually started a master planning process on September 3rd of 2021. In October of 21, we established something called the Facility Master Plan Committee. We have 3 or 4 people in the room tonight that were part of that committee. I'm going to speak more about that committee later in the evening. But that group worked tirelessly for several months. They worked as a group that consisted of a staff member and parent from every building in the district. They were charged with creating a pathway to recommend to the school board, which would drive the long-range master plan. We'll understand what that is a little bit later, but essentially they started charting the course that informs decision-making that the district will use to help chart this new path. In November of 21, we did 3 separate studies within the district. One was a long-term enrollment study, so that looked at projected enrollment populations for a 10-year period, so stretching from 2022 to 2032. We did a capacity study and a facility study. These are studies that are integral to the buildings themselves within the district to help us understand the state of how they're being used and the condition they are in physically. These findings were presented to the board in February. Once they were completely tallied, it became a board presentation. That's actually on the website and can be found in the board minutes. At that time, that's when the board did create a tab for this process. From November through May, the Facility Master Plan Committee went through a series of meetings. These were intensive 2-hour work sessions. They did a lot of work, and a lot of what you're going to hear tonight is all the information that that group used to help make decisions and foster really good discussions. Once we got to May until now, really it became a different group of participants. There's other committees. There's essentially 3 to 4 other committees that have been working on the long-range master planning. This includes leaders within the city. This includes leaders within the school district, and then participation of board members and district administration team as well. So that resulted in what was the first plan for organizational change in the district. It's not perfect and it's not final because we know it's not the right answer, but it's somewhere to start for discussion purposes. So again, that puts us a year into a process. We have a lot of work to do. We're hoping to, by the first part of December, use input from community and the rest of these committees to hopefully provide a really solid recommendation for the board to consider for how to move forward with this district. So, enrollment projection. This is done by a demographer who works with not just census data, but they utilize data in all of the communities within the district, speaking with city leaders, city planners, school district officials, community members. They use real estate and real estate professionals. What they're trying to do is find a realistic projection of the growth capabilities in the Davenport boundary that would affect the population of enrollment within the district. So for a background, that enrollment study is looking forward in the future. If we look backwards, this chart goes back to 1975. In 1975, the district had over 23,000 students within the district. In 2022, we're just a shade over 14,000. I believe it's 14,300-ish, 14,400. So the district has lost a considerable, almost 10,000 students over that period of time, almost 47 years of time. That's a lot. There are not that many buildings that have changed. In fact, the district has constructed expansions of buildings and grown the district physically in that time. With the enrollment projections, the demographer took the entire district and broke it into neighborhoods. The neighborhoods gave the demographer a chance to look at a smaller scale that helped better influence the study to understand, is any of those neighborhoods in a situation where it's growing in population, decreasing in population, or is it staying neutral? This was 87 neighborhoods. This then later gets overlaid with other information in the district to help us understand where the district has experienced growth or decline and where it can experience that growth or decline looking into the future. So what does that mean? Within the district, it is projected that there will be approximately 750 student decline over the next 10 years. So about 75 students per year at the various levels of education. part of their recommendation is that the district should consider a reconfiguration or a consolidation because it's projecting that there's too much facility compared to the number of students enrolled within the district, and that will continue to decline. They do caution that although enrollment is projected to decline, that is a projection, not destiny. That destiny can be changed, but that takes a lot of work, and it takes more than just a school district to be able to grow its own. It takes a lot of effort. So part of the right sizing helps the district get a handle on the operational expense and helps improve the quality of education that it can offer so that it can actually achieve a better outcome. So that's the enrollment projection. Building capacity study. So this is a little bit different. Daniel, if you want to click forward. So the capacity study looks at every building within the district and projects a minimum and maximum capacity in the building. Essentially, what we look at is the number of classrooms and spaces within the building, look at how they're utilized to understand if we have not enough seats for the students in each building or too many seats for the students in each building. What this resulted in was understanding that there are 3,142 to 5,671 additional seats that are not used within the district. That's 3,000 to 5,000 unused seats within the district. There are neighboring districts to Davenport schools that are smaller or within this projection, meaning if an adjacent district closed, all those students could come to Davenport and fit in our buildings, and it wouldn't affect the use of those buildings right now. So that is a dramatic figure to understand that we have somewhere in that 3,000 to 5,000 empty seats in the buildings, and also are expected to grow that number by as much as just shy of 1,000 extra seats. One thing to note, I forgot to mention on the enrollment study portion, often we want to look around and see houses getting built in neighborhoods. It takes 4 new construction houses to produce 1 student within the district. It takes it takes 12 apartment units to produce 1 student within the district. So when we see apartments getting constructed and houses getting constructed, it's a smaller rate of enrollment that occurs based on that construction. So growth in the district with residential construction doesn't necessarily predict anything detrimental. Part of this is because we have people that age in place. You know, they choose not to leave Davenport, even though they have no kids enrolled in the district. We do see that there are families that move in, but that rate of 1 student per every 4 households or per every 12 apartments is pretty dramatic to understand. So in that 3,000 to 5,000 extra seat capacity, Bluegrass and Monroe had the highest amount of excess capacity. Smart had the highest amount of excess capacity at the junior high level, and West High School had the highest amount of excess capacity at the high school level. Facility study. This is a deep dive into understanding the buildings and their condition within the district. This is a well over 600-page document. It's on the district website. I would encourage anybody that's interested in understanding the state and health of buildings within the district that they dig in and look at this. It is basically a deep dive into understanding the condition of buildings from a various level of points, interior condition, exterior condition, accessibility, Americans with Disabilities Act, site construction, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, health and life safety, doors and windows. It's looking at roofs and ceilings and floors. essentially each category gets a rating of good, fair, or poor. There's a lot more data that supports the decision of rating that as good, fair, or poor. Those ratings then get averaged to create a general rating for each building. So within that document, there is an overview series of pages that show a quick snapshot heat map of how our buildings are doing. Are they good, fair, or poor? Understanding whether they're good, fair, or poor is only part of the issue. Part of this also influences the decision making of how we implement the use of those buildings moving forward. Meaning, if we need to utilize, for example, Sudlow's up here, if we say we're using Sudlow as we move forward, then we know we have to address the items that are poor, and we might have to address some of the items that are fair in order for that to still work as a good education building for our students. That means money that has to get spent on that building as we try to make those changes. So that's a lot of information. Did anybody want to revisit of any of that? Because what we'd like to have you do at your groups is talk through this information. If we took 5 to 10 minutes and just talked about that specific information at our tables, we'd like to get just some of your feedback of understanding what that is. Because when we did this with the FMPC group, they were really shocked to hear this information. It's information that not everybody really knows. So let's just take 5 or 10 minutes and talk amongst yourselves, and then we'll do a group share. I'm gonna call a 1 minute warning. We'll come back as a group in a minute.
That ring, the clock says it's time to go back. Time to wake up. It's time to hit the snooze bar.
All right, if we can start coming back as a group. Just in the interest of trying to keep the night moving, we're going to get into deeper conversation as we go, but just hearing some of that information in the first part of this presentation, what were some of the thoughts coming out of your guys' tables? If anybody wants to share, you just push the button to talk, the little light will turn green, you can talk, and then when you're done, just push it to switch it back to red. So anybody want to share back in the back?
Hi, good evening. So my question is, for capacity, how did you figure that out, especially with Walcott? We're a K-8 building, and the sizes of the classrooms are elementary on the one end versus the other intermediate. Our elementary staff has enough troubles trying to fit in their small bodies. How, if they change that, how did you figure that in for capacity for intermediate students?
Yeah, capacity is a vicious animal. Working with the building leaders, our team went through and looked at every classroom. They look at what they call utilization rate. So not every building or not every room in the building is used 100% of the time, every part of the day. So then certain rooms are used at different periods through the day. So that produces what's called a utilization rate. Then we look at the targeted class sizes that the district has initiated. So the target class size of how many students per class is part of that factor. But essentially, it is a mathematical equation that creates. I'd have to show you an Excel spreadsheet, but it is working through each space in every building, calculating how many students are utilizing that space throughout the course of the day. So you're saying that it's showing too many students in the building? Yeah, well, that's good to know. Yeah. It's the other thing, this is a good point. The other thing about school buildings is faculty and staff do an amazing job of making use of every space you have. So spaces that could be used for classrooms, sometimes are used for other purposes. So some of what we find, for example, in Walcott, there are shortfalls in the type of spaces there. And for any path that moves forward, Walcott likely would need to have some changes just to have the appropriate type of space for the students there. So, all right, other comments from tables? Don't be bashful. As Bruce said, only 12 people are listening online. Was anybody shocked to hear anything about the district enrollment from historical numbers till now? Oh, here we go.
Was very surprised because I moved into the district in 2020 in June from out of state. And in moving to this district, we live in Bluegrass. And when we started, there was not a spot for my fifth grade daughter. We literally were one day before school started, didn't know where she was going. So it's very interesting to me to see this information. There's all these open seats because that's not been my perception as a parent with things. So
Yeah, no, that's great. And the other thing we'll find is that the district looks wildly different from one side to another, from north to south, east to west. It's different across the town. In the back?
So with the calculations that did they when they were looking at those, that's a mathematical calculation based on square footage, right, of space of classrooms. What about the special programs that we have? So
That's,
I mean,
yeah,
there's
that's,
when we say to parents, there's all this extra space. Well, that space, as in Walcott, I'm sure, and other schools, is being utilized for special ed classrooms that can only have a max of 10 students at a time, or an intervention that's supposed to be small in size. Did they consider that when you just put the numbers of
yeah,
you fit 600 kids?
yeah, yeah. So special education is a big part of that. And part of that is understanding where a classroom may have special education, or a room that's different size than the classroom may be utilized for that special education need. Because you have to understand, when you look at a floor plan of a building, you have rooms that look like classrooms and you have rooms that are different sized. We have to understand how all of them are being used for that. So in some buildings, you may have a room that's a fraction the size of a classroom, but is still being used for special education or some other special programming.
Do you know when they came up or what the cutoff or when they found the amount of people that they have per building? Because we have a shuffle that goes on every year. And we were just curious when that number was found.
So this is a 21-22 enrollment basis. So this is based on 21-22.
I'll share out for our table. We're representing Wilson and Eisenhower and Bluegrass over here. Just to speak to the Bluegrass point, just because we have the space doesn't mean we have teachers in each one of those rooms. So they staff based on enrollment at the end of the previous year. So just to answer that about the question you had, Andrea. We had talked about middle school safety and how important that is. And so we loved hearing that the district's going to be financially responsible and making it right-sized for our community. But we just want to highlight that adding more students at the middle school, that was something that we were concerned about. And then we were talking about at the high school level, if picking the high school is still going to be an option with the proposals that are there, so that if a student wants to get their AA, they could still go to North if they lived in the West area or the Central area and that sort of thing, because obviously that could change the number of students in each of the buildings. So that was a question we had as well.
Yeah, that's a good question on the high school. So the high school open enrollment is a district policy. That's not considered as part of any pathway decision in this planning. So that would require board policy change. So in theory, whatever modification happens in the way the district is organized, that still exists. A student can choose to go where they wish. Security, again, part of the solution is helping the district understand how they can invest in their buildings to make improvements, which will enhance the programming features and functions of the buildings for delivering curriculum and improving the quality of experience for the students. So hopefully that will allow an investment in those junior high level buildings. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Okay, well, we're going to jump forward and talk a little bit about our facility master plan process. So essentially this committee was gathered, as I mentioned before, it's representatives from every school building in the district. It's parents and staff members working together. What they did is they started with 17 different pathways, K through 8, and 3 high school options. So that's our high school pathways. Pathway is an organizational chart. So that says What if the district reduced the number of buildings to only have X number of elementaries, Y number of elementaries? What would that look like? What that is not just the quantity of buildings, but how many students are in the buildings. So we look at buildings on two factors of criteria: total number of students and how many classes per grade level, or we'll call it tracks or sections. So if you hear the word 5-track elementary, or 5-section elementary, that's 5 classes per each grade level. So to understand how this works, just, whoops. Yeah, well, let's talk about that. So as I mentioned before, the Facility Master Plan Committee, they worked from October through May. Go ahead forward. They were component to understanding that building capacity analysis. They actually received a presentation on the facility study. But the real meat of it was the Facility Master Plan Committee worked for a series of several months. There was 8 intensive meetings. There were 50 to 60 committee members. They had a collective of 800 hours of effort placed in this process. So all of what they did is online and can be found. There's background information. A lot of it contains some of the stuff we just looked at in the last segment. These studies and other support material are on the website. So if you're interested in facility study, enrollment study, capacity study, the full document is online and you can look into it. There's information about the purpose, the charge and norms of the committee that was formed, dates and agendas, the presentations and the summaries of all meetings are online. There's a lot of information there. So they started with 17 buildings, 17 plans. They were charged with the goal of providing a recommendation to the Davenport Board of Education with respect to 2 specific questions. What is the best grade configuration, number of school building transitions, and the best pathway experience for students in the district? And what is the best path forward to right-size the quantity of school buildings to align with the current and projected student enrollments? So that group was not responsible for determining which buildings might remain open or closed or expanded or modified. They were charged with figuring out a pathway and organization for the district. That pathway and organization is critical because it informs how you start to look at utilizing buildings as you move forward. So when the committee worked through their whole process, they came from 17 different pathways to, I believe it was 3. So they had funneled down these pathways of organization. They had a pretty solid understanding of what they thought that the best pathways were. They wanted to be very solid, so a survey was done of that group. There was a 65% participation rate, but that helped inform that they were truly all in consensus as what the pathway recommendation would be. Go ahead. So they ranked these 3 pathways that they looked at, and then they went back and rediscussed and made sure that they felt that they were all in alignment. So before we get to the recommendation, there was criteria that they placed on the pathway recommendation. The criteria was critical because they wanted the board to understand that there were a lot of factors that needed to be included in any recommendation. So they felt it was important to increase the potential to enhance educational opportunities. They were concerned about the number of school transitions. So a transition being when a student moves from elementary to junior high to high school. They looked at pathways that had more transitions and they looked at pathways that had less. They felt that the fewer transitions, the better. One of the pathways had a different kind of junior high configuration, and if that was to be adopted by the board, they wanted to be assured that any situation where 5th and 6th graders might be in a building with 7th and 8th graders, that they have a non-blended experience, so they're separated, while sharing the key resources of the building and staff. So there may be shared resources in the building, but those students should have separate experiences. They were concerned about the busing impacts with any change in organization. They thought it was beneficial for students to understand the predictability of their experience. So knowing what school they're transitioning to, how long they'd be in that building, that was important. The duration of the time each student is in a particular building was a critical point. There's a lot of other components to what influence that, but the longer a student's in a building with staff, there's more time for that staff to have experience with that student, which helps intervene when it comes to things such as dropout rates or improving their learning aptitude while there. Total school enrollment in terms of school size is a critical factor. And then understanding how the grade configuration can be adapted and supported in less densely populated areas, meaning the grade configuration may be different in one town or location than another. The neighborhood impact on pathway, so maintaining a neighborhood feel, focus on early education in buildings. So it was important to make sure that early learning is component to any of the elementary buildings. I talked about the duration of staff interaction with students. It was discussed that the transition years of a child moving from 5th to 6th grade or 8th to 9th is often a really hard point in time, or in our district, moving from 6th to 7th, going from an elementary to a junior high is a hard transition, and those transition years are where you can lose that student in terms of their aptitude and potential, and that often can impact dropout rates. Having a balance throughout the district, so not to have a portion of the district that's in a have or another portion in a have-not, to create more equity across the district. The balance of that would create opportunities for access to programs, funding, better environment, different instruction for all of the students in the district. Other important factors were discussed. Student retention. It's not unknown that students leave Davenport schools to go to other districts. How can we make an improvement in our district that keeps those students around? Staff recruitment. It's component to any business. The district is a business. It is hard to recruit staff anywhere you're at, and so any improvements that happen in the district should take into account that it's important to retain more students and to be able to recruit staff. With fewer buildings and more sections in the building, then there is a better situation for staff and curriculum because there's more opportunity for collaboration among students. There's a better ability to balance class sizes, so bubble years can be handled a little better. Bubble years being when you have a bigger class than a smaller, or balancing class sizes between grade levels. Improve the ability to cover classes when a teacher is sick or some other thing is impacting, but having more sections is creating more opportunity for one staff member to help cover other classes. For example, if you had a 2-section building, one teacher is gone, now the other teacher has twice as many students, so it becomes a little bit more challenging. So the FMPC provided a recommendation to the board, which was 2 options. They were labeled at that time as option 3A and 2B. Option 3A was to produce kindergarten through 4th grade elementary buildings. That would be a total of 12 5-track elementary schools at approximately 550 students each, and 6 intermediate schools with approximately 830 students in each building. So the elementaries would be organized as K through 4. Technically, that would be pre-K through 4. And then the junior highs would be 5th grade through 8th grade. There was a second pathway that was recommended, which was organize the elementary schools as pre-K through 5th grade. That would reduce the number of school buildings to 15 four-track elementary schools. There would be about 520 students in each building, and we would remain with 5 intermediate schools at 760 students within each. It was recommended that the high schools not change configuration, quantity, or organization, meaning they would remain as 9 through 12. There would be 4 high schools remaining just as there is now. So that FMPC recommendation is a lot to comprehend. I'm probably not the best person to deliver that recommendation. Also, we do have some FMPC members if anybody wants to speak to that, but those members are with us tonight. But I would like to just offer it up to the room to maybe just talk amongst this a bit at your tables. We'll go for another 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll come back together and talk as a group. All right, we'll call a 1 minute warning. All right, can we start coming back together as a group again? Okay, so talking about pathways and organization, what kind of comments came out of our table discussions? Anybody?
Some great questions. As we are all inside of our district, living and breathing in the buildings that we're in, it's hard to imagine, okay, what do you mean? What does this look like? I was talking to a Sudlow family over here. It's like, I cannot see 5th through 8th graders at Sudlow. Well, we would have to do, and we're going to see this next, but we'd have to do a major investment in order to do these pathways. It would not look like that. The Facility Master Planning Committee, I'm going to channel my inner you. They said we will not approve that, accept it, if they do not have separate experiences. I went to Walcott, and the whole time I was there, I didn't know there was an elementary school there. And when I was in junior high, I came from H.M. Perry, went to Walcott, I had no idea there was an elementary school there. That's the feeling that Facility Master Planning Committee said, if you go 5-8, that's what that has to have. And there were so many other rich opportunities, bands, foreign language, different opportunities that those people said that's what makes that option intriguing. Plus the pre-K 4 allows us to really focus, hone in on our early literacy options. So that was the mindset of the facility master planning. So when you look at those options, our junior highs, middle schools, they'll need major renovations and updates before we even decide to move forward with that. So hopefully that will clarify a little bit. And those were awesome questions that happened at every table I went to.
Thanks, TJ. Anybody else?
Okay, I'm a parent from Walcott. I also went to Walcott. Like you, I didn't know there was an elementary until like 8th grade, and I'm like, oh, where'd all those little kids come from? Why in the heck would we decide to change that if it's already working? Just wondering. I mean, it's just like all your plans have pretty much said, oh, Walcott, you can't have your elementary anymore. It's been working for 40 years.
Sure. So in our pathway, and that feedback will be taken, it'll be written down, and we'll take it. Okay, and we've received that feedback, believe it. And so, in order for us to structure our district this way in our early literacy, and we have to make some difficult decisions. So this is the first starting point that we have. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be where we land, but this is where we are starting. And so, in order to have that regional experience, like we're talking about, another key component to this plan is that it's regionalized. If you look all across the nation, the country, when kids go to certain school districts, they're doing Falcon Jacks in kindergarten, okay? And so being connected to a region is really important. So in these plans, having 2 junior highs in each region is very important. So that's the reason why that decision was made. And so in order for the early literacy components to be there, and the frontier, the western edge of our district, that junior high being located at Walcott, since there were already facilities there at Walcott to support the junior highs, because the renovation would be way too much at the other two schools. That's why that was selected that way. And we do recognize that for a very long time that has been an elementary school, and we do recognize that that's why people move to Walcott, so their kids go to one school. And so we anticipate that being something that's said to us and that feedback is given to us. And so thank you for sharing that, and we have heard that. But that's the mindset of it. 2 junior highs on the west, 2 in the central, and 2 in the north. So no, I think what you've heard from everybody here today is that we're gathering feedback. So no fixed mindsets. Thank you for asking.
You want to have that experience, and the same 5th and 6th or 6 through 8, whatever it is. I mean, is that the whole reason? Is there security questions, like you're trying to keep kids separate from one to the other? Because I feel like these pathways just 100% kills the elementary, and I know that there's a lot of speak for Walcott, but it kills our Walcott Elementary, which will have a trickle-down effect possibly for our town to kill it. It may not happen in the first 5 years, but it will. So that I just didn't know, is it also security? I mean,
when you say security, do you mean the building security?
Yeah, like if we're worried about the elementary being in the same school as the middle school, is there reason for that, or it's just about the experience is what I'm, I guess,
Yes.
questioning.
Yes, it has the K-8 is not about because currently, and I think people would come to the same conclusion, that works in the facility at Walcott. So it's not about the security. It's solely about the notion that this is the direction that we would want to go, that the committee and anybody that's reviewed this plan would want to go, that would be a junior high, and that the 2 elementary schools would be Buffalo and Walcott, the K4s on the side. So what I heard you say is that you believe that would kill the town if that elementary school came out of there.
At some point, yeah.
Yeah,
It will hurt it, no doubt.
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Got the green light. So if I could, from the perspective of the committee and all of the work that we did as a committee, just so that you have an idea of where the K4 versus 5-8 situation came from, you have to remember none of our work had anything to do with these. If we cut it down to 12 elementary schools, that this one and this one and this one would go. It had nothing to do with that. It was the utopia of, if we had, what could we do to make the best learning experience and teaching experience for all of our kiddos and then for our staff. And so when I had the luxury of teaching first grade and in a 4-section grade level at the time, and having 3 other teammates that would share the workload with you is massive. That help is huge. And if you could have a 5-section first grade or a 5-section kindergarten, the thought of how, all of the opportunities that the kids would have and that the staff would have to lighten the load, but also to shine on the strength of that educator would be amazing. So you would have a huge focus on, again, that early literacy that we know our district needs to be working on and focusing on. And also, if you're drawing to get 5 tracks of one grade level, for argument's sake, maybe it's 4, who knows, but for argument's sake, to do 5, you're drawing from a larger boundary, right? So that for where I'm at Monroe, where I'm at, that would be awesome, because then the transient level of our kiddos would hopefully decrease. So my kiddo could maybe currently live in the Monroe boundary and be moving to Jefferson and back and forth and all the time, but not ever have to leave that school because, and then that stays, that home base for them stays true. And so when we were looking at what would be the best experience for our kiddos, we had to look district wide. How could we make a more equitable learning experience for everybody above the hill, below the hill, east side versus west side? Because we know that that currently is not the case. And so that's what we were looking at. And the same thing with the 5th through 8th. We know that that's a critical time for relationship building and our kiddos who really need to have staff that backs them. And we got a lot of feedback from the middle school staff that really said, oh, we want more time with them. As soon as we're pulling them in from 6th grade into 7th grade and sorting out all their needs, we're already getting them ready to like walk out the door again into high school. So they had not enough time, and they really wanted to have that intensive time and that amount of relationship building with them, as well as, again, being able to provide that many more services and learning opportunities for the kiddos when you have that much more staff in the same place. So that's really what our thoughts were and our focus was there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. All of the work that happened to create this recommendation had no building names whatsoever. It was purely a pathway. If you want to expound on that.
All right. I was also a part of the committee as a parent. And so I can tell, so I brought up on my phone, when we were looking at all the plans, just like she had mentioned, we did not know names of buildings. But every single pathway we were given like an advantage and opportunities, disadvantages and challenges, questions and comments about it, and then just like mixed responses. And that was from the Davenport School District. They brought some educators to give us that information so that we could know. So like for instance, 3A, like one of the advantages was multiple years in the same building for relationships, just like she had mentioned. You can find this all online, but we were given that information when looking at all these different pathways. The other reason I really liked 3A, I'll be transparent about that. I liked it for like the band and orchestra, because right now, like in the elementary schools, like band is there like one day a week, and it would just give bigger opportunities. And then with, it was also mentioned with the have and the have-nots. So some of the schools are low income schools, and they can get family liaison officer, extra teachers in the building to help out. And we were told that, depending on specific situations, they could have it to where the whole school district can have these opportunities instead of a school that has things and a school that does not. So those were some other factors that went into it as well.
Thank you.
Those are great perspectives, and I want to clarify something. So that our facility master planning committee, they did a wonderful job of saying these are the two pathways. From there, the leaders inside of Davenport School District started. We are the ones that put the names on things. I think maybe I misspoke there. That they had no idea. They were not given any names or anything like that. The next steps for that, the meat of that was the administrators in the district. So sorry if I misspoke on that. The other point of this is the biggest point of change up there is the K4 5-8, but there's two options up there, and the K5 6-8 is still a viable option for us. So I wanted to make sure that a lot of our conversations focused on that, but don't lose sight. There are two options up there, and that committee was very adamant. They did not want to give just one recommendation to the board. They wanted to see two different options. So point of clarification. Thank you for sharing that.
So one thing that I'm struggling with, and I'm hoping to get a little more clarity, is what I heard said with the K4 5-8 option was that with that 5-8 option, you wanted to keep 5th and 6th grade one kind of experience, 7th and 8th a different experience, separated. Which to me, then we've also talked about wanting to have that building relationships. Well, that to me then is contradictory. We're saying you're going to have kind of 4 transitions here. You're going to do a K through 4, 5th, 6th in one building, we'll call it A, 7th and 8th B experience, but you're still in the same building. So I'm confused internally as to which way, because it seems
No,
contradictory.
that's a great question. So the transition going from one building to another, when you have the same counselor, when you have the same principal, when you have the same, you see how the same PE teacher, those are the transitions where if someone is doing wonderful or someone is struggling, the connection to the humans inside that building is what makes the difference. That's the too many transitions. So our current structure 7-8, if you ask any one of our junior high, middle school teachers, they get them for a year, and then it's like they just built this relationship and they're sending them off to high school. That was the overall feel for, hey, a bigger chunk of time with our kiddos would make a bigger difference from the facility master planning committee. So very, very good point. So the fact that I'm going to this building for a longer stretch of time, and there's common human beings in that where I can build a relationship to, common structures that I can get used to, routines, procedures, that those are the differences.
Can I yes and that? In addition to what he's saying, so if you considered fill in the blank middle school currently, and you had 5, 6 over here and 7, 8, and you have like you said, the A team and the B team of staff, and I know I got this girl over here and she needs me, but I'm on team A. I might be able to bubble part of my prep, or when we've talked about, you probably know, like, one year you've got a huge second grade class, but then the next year that class is coming up is too small and you got to cut a section of second grade, and then what do you do with that teacher? But there would be some potential for, like, in those bubble groups, for a teacher to be able to loop in and go from team A to team B and B to A, so that there would be staff overlap within those kids or within those groups, so that there would be like a really lovely handoff to, like, oh, this, I'm handing you right off to like this next team of humans. So even though you're having a separate experience in the same building, that the staff collaboration and overlap would be whatever the kiddos would need. And we, like, as from the middle school perspective, from the parent perspective, really loved that option.
I respectfully disagree with the saying that they could bond with that first piece, where I've had students for 6th through 8th grade, I teach intermediate, where I've had them 6th, 7th, and 8th. Our jobs often change with the need in the building, so I got to bond with my students. I actually have had students where I had them in elementary because we did do things with them, with our intermediate students. Also, I was like to just, busing. With that setup, with some of our country students, did they take that into consideration, that sometimes even getting to their elementary, it is a trick? And then you're saying you have to go further to be able to go to some of these buildings? That's going to be an awful long time. They're on the buses, and they're already packed because we had busing issues. And then also the consideration that our particular building was a last stop. So if they had troubles along the way, we got pushed out and the kids were there an extra hour waiting. Some things to consider, please.
I guess I'm speaking more for in Davenport, I don't know much about the Walcott Bluegrass area, but I think that the biggest concern, for parents, I mean, it seems like 6th grade is the hard grade, right? Like, they went back to junior or to elementary. People liked that. Some people didn't. Teachers did. Teachers didn't. Parents did. All the things. 6th grade really doesn't fit very well on either side. It's a really transitional year. I think that the concern with that is we're losing so many people at 6th grade or 7th grade, depending on when they're going to junior high. Our issue in Davenport right now is the junior highs. People don't want to go to them. They're scared of them. Putting them back at 800 students will terrify people. Putting 5th through 8th makes sense in a lot of ways if you separate them, but you mentioned things like, well, then they could share resources. Band would be better, foreign language. You just pulled foreign language from all junior highs in Davenport. I don't know what you're talking about when you talk about those things, because the resources that you're talking about aren't even existing now. they have no electives, they have no choices. So I guess I look at what you're doing with junior highs and I go, it doesn't matter what you do if you make those kind of decisions for the junior highs, because you're making the junior highs less and less desirable for parents. And I had a kid go from Eisenhower to Sudlow last year in 7th grade, and I'll have another one going this year. And the failure, like with all of this, is that transition is not working. People are leaving at that point every time, and nothing is being done for it except for making things that make it worse. So with either of these, like, if we're not going to fix that problem, it doesn't really matter if they're 5th through 8th or 6th through 8th or 7th and 8th, because no one's going to be there for that because they're scared of it. So like, I guess I would be interested to see the numbers from like moving 6th graders back, how many kids you lost in 6th grade versus how many you lost in 7th grade with that change, because I can almost guarantee you that the change was at 6th grade and this year it's moving to 7th grade. And nothing is being done about that. And as the enrollment just keeps declining, like that's where you're losing them. The high schools are pretty like doing pretty well, but you've lost half of those kids before they even get to a high school because you lost them in junior high. Elementary schools, like people are still going to them. People are still moving in the district. It's 100% the junior highs. And I don't know that either of these address that, because if you go back up to 836 students, you won't have 836 students, I can guarantee you, because they'll all be in different districts because they're terrified of junior high, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I asked if she worked for our demographer, because that's exactly what our demographer says. So you're greatly in tuned to the community, and that's exactly it. And that's why the main focus from the Facility Master Plan Committee is on the junior highs. And so also, it has to be different. And I know exactly what you're saying. We live it, we watch it, we see it every single day. So
Did you, like, have you heard any negative feedback with parents with the 6th graders going back to junior high? Or I mean, going back to elementary?
Oh yeah.
Parents have?
Yes.
Okay, I've never heard a parent, like I've
I've
talked
heard
to.
it both ways.
Okay,
Yes.
the teachers, they're like, it's overwhelming. I know at the elementary school with that many kids.
Yes,
but
we've heard it both ways.
it's just interesting.
All right. I would just like to celebrate that high schools would not be touched in both configurations. I think that should be applauded. I think it's very powerful to keep 4 grade levels. So thank you for that. And just to speak to what Abby was talking about just now about safety and piggybacking on what you said, Mr. Schneckloth, is just the configuration. You look at so many big urban districts, they have a lot more kids in their middle schools and their high schools. I mean, we went to Johnston. My son he goes to Central High School, and we went to Johnston, and you see like they've got so many kids in these buildings. I mean, they've got 8 sections of 1st grade when you walk into their elementary schools. And so just knowing that our mindset, we just have to see the vision of it's going to look different is exciting. I think when it comes to safety, like well-lit schools, right? You pull up and it's the Taj Mahal. You have lights, you have sidewalks, you have visually safe buildings is so important. And then you'll have more staff to supervise those students. So all of those things are really super exciting. My son was at Sudlow when there were 900 plus kids there when it was 6th through 8th grade, and it was just too many kids, right? So just visually seeing it different. I love seeing these numbers lower than 900. That's great. But knowing that the facilities are going to be nicer, bigger, more well-maintained is very exciting.
So part of the decision with the high schools is to reduce the number of high schools makes them large. 2,000 plus students, which is likely too big for a high school. If they remain where they're at, we have about 1,400 or so students per building, which is a nice size for a high school. So the committee felt like that was a good approach. Also, the idea that the high schools are still somewhat regionalized in the district, which still maintains that kind of that camaraderie and feel for the neighborhoods that support those schools. Understanding that there's still an open enrollment situation, which allows students to kind of pick a path too. For the junior high schools, as TJ said, it was very important that the committee thought that a problem be solved for the junior high school level. For the elementary schools, it was trying to arrive at a situation of a number of sections and trying to create more uniformity across the district with that. So that being said, the idea of option 3A is aggressive. This is a big change for any district. I mean, it's a paradigm shift. So it's a lot to wrap your head around. It's a lot to figure out how to solve for also. It is the harder problem to solve. So some of the solution has to figure that out first. And then, the pathway 2B is a little bit easier. It is still a dynamic change in the district. Yes, sixth graders used to be in the junior highs and they've moved to the elementaries, but moving them back is not an easy task. So in any of these pathway options, as we apply them to the buildings in the district, we understand that something has to change with that. You cannot just make this change and say, good luck, here you go. We're gonna have to do physical improvements to the buildings because, as it was said for one of the buildings, you cannot cram that many in the building. No, you really probably couldn't. Something's gotta change or it's gonna be a miserable experience for the student and the staff that's using that building. So that being said, we'll just jump right into the next piece. So in the district, if we jump forward, we started with this arrangement of buildings. We know we have 17 elementaries, 1 K-8, 4 junior highs, 4 high schools. We have 3 early learning centers. So how do we start working with that and understanding how it informs an organizational change? So if we jump forward, the 17 elementaries are different sized buildings. It's really hard to read even up close because the text is really kind of faint, but these buildings range anywhere from 2 to 4 section elementary buildings. The capacity of these buildings is listed on here. The enrollment of these buildings is listed on this chart. So it's trying to understand where are our students in the district. As we jump forward, we understand there's 1 K-8 in the district. It has a different kind of organization. 4 junior high schools, they are all just slightly different from one another. We have the 4 high schools. If we jump forward, so looking at what do we do with all this information? This is a lot to comprehend. So these buildings are all placed in the district by color. So the blue dots are the elementaries. The red dot is our Walcott K-8. Our yellow dots are the junior high schools. They're named on this so you can get a sense of what buildings are where and how are they organized. Go ahead and jump forward. So what do you look at to start determining criteria for building? Where is the demographer's change in enrollment occurring when you overlay it against a map of where our district buildings are? Geographic position matters, site size matters, quantity of classrooms matters. There's fluctuation in classroom quantity because how they are used in a building can vary wildly, but in general, it does have an effect. Building improvement, was there money invested in these buildings over the past decade? Building assets, age of building, historic nature of the building. Do any of these buildings have appropriate ability to accommodate preschool as they sit? So when you overlay the demographer information, the blue dots represent buildings that are located in areas that are experiencing a projected decrease in enrollment. The green dots are kind of minor change. They are fluctuating up and down. The red dots are locations where we are seeing a projected increase in enrollment. Go ahead and jump forward. Those are just show the boundary catchments of those schools. Geographic location, if we can go back, one more, please. This charted the junior highs as well. Go ahead and jump forward. Geographic location. The majority of our schools, it's no secret, the majority of the school buildings in the district are predominantly located inside of the 280 corridor. We do have 3 buildings outside of that corridor. That is a geographic difference. That should be taken into consideration for what happens, because part of any solution should recognize it's a different experience for family, staff, and student in that part of the geography, which is why when TJ says no decisions being locked in place, this is just things to talk about. So jumping forward, site size. We have a handful of sites, building properties in the district that have greater than 15 acres on their property. That is a critical factor, because if you look to grow any building to accommodate a growth in its building capacity, we need to make sure we have appropriate site size to handle expansions. We do have, the majority of our sites are smaller than 15 acres, which means they are harder to solve for, because any change in the building might eat up more of the property area that's available. Go ahead. Quantity of classrooms. At the elementary school level, to handle the number of sections that we're looking at in these pathways, 24 or more classrooms is a really good factor. 19 or less is a hard one. 20 to 23 is kind of a modest rating, but what this means is if you have fewer classrooms, you're going to have to add on more space to the building to be able to handle the changes that might need to happen. If you have more classrooms available, it takes less expansion. Go ahead. At the junior high level, it's really a minor difference between buildings. We have sufficient classrooms to handle capacity. Yes, these buildings will need change no matter what, but starting with a significant amount of classrooms does have an impact. Go ahead. There's a few of our buildings have had additions and renovations within the last 10 years. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't walk away from one of these buildings, but it is an important factor to understand what that change was, and should that be a criteria for making a decision of whether that building is utilized or not. I can't answer to that because it comes into a series of other factors that get applied, but what you're going to find is that a majority of our buildings actually have had no significant addition or renovation projects within the past 10 years. We've seen it at our high school levels, but not at the elementaries. Buildings that have a combined cafeteria gymnasium versus a separate cafeteria gymnasium versus a separate cafeteria gymnasium auditorium. The reason this is an important factor to understand is that having separate cafeteria and gymnasium facilitates being able to have lunch and PE over broader periods of time. If you have a single, what we call a cafetorium, you got to set up, take down that to change from PE to lunch period and then back to PE. So it's a little harder to utilize. Having a separate gym and cafeteria is much better. Having separate cafeteria, gymnasium, auditorium is just an enhanced feature. Actually, this slide is incorrect. I think we realized that every junior high has a cafeteria and gymnasiums, and I believe a stage also. So go ahead and jump forward. Building age. So when you look at this slide, our newest building is Buffalo. It's 20 years old or less. We have a really good portion of our buildings that are 21 to 74 years old. Our oldest buildings are more than 75 years old. You look on the map, it's not surprising to see where they're at. They're in the oldest portions of town. It really is kind of following just common sense, which is as the city grew and expanded, so did the need for school buildings. And so that's how those buildings dotted into place over time. And so if we switch to the last slide, it's going to be no surprise that those oldest buildings are also Many of them are listed as historic buildings. What does that mean? Building listed as a historic building affects the disposition of that building. If you were to walk away from it, you can't just tear it down. However, if it is utilized for some other purpose, it does open up fund streams that might inspire investment in those buildings to change their use. So there creates opportunity for those buildings to still live within the city. So those buildings are mapped, showing some criteria that you just want to try to comprehend as you're looking at what do you do with all this. So then we also want to look at these buildings in a different format. So the chart on the right, we'll look at this in a little bit different fashion, but part of what the FMPC committee was understanding was when they talked about predictable experience, we just wanted to see what were they talking about. So looking at all the buildings and where do they feed each other. The buildings on the left are elementary schools. They're in blue. The kind of the aqua colored in the middle are our junior highs, and the greenish color on the right is our high schools. If we jump ahead, just the top portion of that slide, Bluegrass and Buffalo have a kind of a predictable path. There's two buildings that have just a little above and just a little under 200 student enrollment. They're feeding Walcott. K-8, Walcott predominantly feeds to West, although students can elect to go elsewhere. Also feeding Walcott is a portion of the students from Jackson. Hayes and Monroe predominantly feed Smart, as well as Jackson, Madison, and Wilson. And then from Smart, a lot of those students go either to West or Central. Some of them can elect to go to North if they want, but a majority of those students go that direction. Feeding Williams, you can see there's a large number of elementaries that send their students forward to Williams Junior High. If we jump forward, that feeds to Central High School, as well as some of those students from Williams go to North, some go to West. So there's a variety of directions where those students go. Buchanan feeds to both Williams and Wood. Fillmore, Truman, Harrison predominantly feed to Wood. Eisenhower, Garfield, McKinley, Washington predominantly feed to Sudlow, which predominantly feeds towards Central. And then we have Mid-City, which is our alternative high school experience, which we couldn't even chart a path because it comes from all over. So being able to figure out what do you do with this. The FMPC recommendation resulted in a couple of things. It said, we'd like to see a quantity of buildings with a number of sections in that building and try to have a predictable pathway of where that building feeds from. So where do those transitions go to? If you want to just flip to one slide. So this, what you're going to see is what became the first kind of organizational change. This is a hard one to do. So when the FMPC says in one option, reduce from 17 to 12 elementaries, and you have to ask yourself which ones close, that's a really hard proposition to wrap your head around because it's a dynamic effect. To close one building puts an impact on adjacent buildings. It puts an impact from busing, from understanding what has to happen to that building to be able to accommodate those students, figuring out if you close too many buildings in one region and not in another, how does that impact the junior highs and the high schools? So starting to look at ways of implementing that becomes challenging. The second pathway, changing by reducing from 17 to 15 elementaries, is still a hard proposition. And it's still a hard proposition because somebody's building will close, and that is not an easy decision that gets made. So coming up with a solution is a challenging one. District leadership and planning committees had a lot of discussions about what should the vision of the district be as you move forward, and how does that influence But how does that affect the pathway of organization that gets adopted? So what we're going to look at is just kind of a first attempt at doing that. None of this is set in stone. None of this is none of this is final. It's just attempting to apply that pathway to an organization within the district to see what that looks like. Also, we will have to understand what is the financial impact of this, both in terms of a projected savings for the district, but a potential impact of expense to be able to reinvest in the district to make improvements to these buildings as well. So if we jump forward, we can go one more. We call these organizational chart options. So we've kind of renumbered these as we explored different options. We had them labeled as 1, 2, 3, and 4. The first option is using the K through 4 elementary 5 through 8 grade configuration. It's showing 5-6/7-8, recognizing that the 5-6 and 7-8 would be in the same building but different experience. The elementary buildings, as we walk forward with this, will also include preschools as well. This option 1A is what was previously that option 3 in the pathways that you saw just a little bit ago, but this is 12 elementary schools, 6 junior high schools. The 6 junior high schools was working out the math of just creating a number of buildings based on that recommendation to accommodate the population size and students. So when that organization was written up by the FMPC, there was no idea of where a 6th junior high would occur. So we'll just kind of dig into this. On the right is what that organization is. The blue on the left is elementaries. The middle column is junior highs. The right-hand column is high schools. So we'll jump forward one slide. The very top of this, there's a little chart that basically says we're starting with 17 elementaries, reducing to 12. We're starting with 4 junior high schools and 1 K-8, changing to 6 junior high schools. In this option, it was discussed that Bluegrass and Buffalo would become 4-track elementary schools. Walcott would become the 5-8 junior high school. Monroe or Hayes, one of those two, or potentially even a new elementary building, would serve the kind of the southwest portion of Davenport, would be a 4-section elementary school. Wilson would remain as a 5-section elementary, and those would send students either to SMART or potentially to a new building that would serve as a relocated SMART junior high school. Both Walcott and SMART would predominantly feed west, although those students could elect to go to any high school of their choice. If we jump to the next page, Eisenhower and Harrison would become buildings that would support a new junior high. The idea of the new junior high was understanding that all the junior highs tend to be really aligned kind of straight up and down on Division Street, or our junior high kids are at Walcott or at Sudlow, which are leaving kind of a gap in the northeast portion of Davenport. So the groups that looked at this strategized that maybe something in the northeast portion of Davenport would help balance some population. So the consideration was that there would be some realignment with 5-track elementaries feeding a new junior high. Fillmore and Truman would remain as 5-section elementaries, sending students to Wood as a 5-8, which would supply predominantly to North High School. Again, those students could elect any high school. And then jumping forward, at the bottom of this solution, Adams and Madison would be 5-track and 4-track elementaries, which would send students to Williams Junior High, or potentially Williams could relocate. Williams could remain in place or relocate to a new location as a 5-8. McKinley and Garfield would remain as the eastern elementaries, both as 5 sections, which would send students to Sudlow as a 5-8, supplying predominantly Central High School. Mid-City would remain. So in this option, Buchanan, Washington, Hayes or Williams would close, potentially, Hayes or Monroe potentially would close. Williams and or Smart would either remain or potentially change location. So that is the kind of the nutshell of that in a map form. If we jump forward, it just illustrates where we are left with school buildings. This is 12 elementaries, the 6 junior highs, and then we do not chart the high schools on the map, but it helps to illustrate that you're starting to regionalize the elementaries to respond to our junior highs the same way that the junior highs currently are regionalized, so that changes that outlook for the district. So that's the option 1A. The next option, which is 1B, is exactly the same thing. The only difference in this really is that discussion of does Williams and Smart change locations or not. So we can kind of skip past this, Danielle, and go to the option 3. So the option 3 looks at a K5-6-8 configuration. So from that FMPC recommendation, it was using 15 elementary schools, 5 junior highs. In this particular option, it was considered that Walcott could become a 6-8 so that it would be one of those junior high schools. That can be subject to future conversation, but in this particular application of this, if we jump forward, the consideration was that, again, we're starting with 17 elementaries. We need to get to 15. We have 4 junior highs and 1 K-8. We need to get to 5 junior highs. So in this particular instance, Fillmore, Harrison, and Truman would all serve as 4-track elementaries. They would send their students to Wood Junior High, which would be the 6-8 junior high, sending students to North High School. If you do go online and look at these further, there's projected enrollments and capacities for these buildings, so it helps you get an understanding of the size and ramifications of this. Adams, Madison, and Wilson would be 4-track elementary schools. These would have a pathway to Williams Junior High, which would be a 6-8. Those Williams Junior High students would predominantly be sent to North or, I believe, West. Bluegrass, Buffalo, and Jackson. Bluegrass and Buffalo would be 4-track elementaries. Jackson would be a 4-track elementary, utilizing Walcott Junior High as a 6-8. Sending students forward to West High School. If we jump forward one more, Hayes, Jefferson, and Monroe would be 4-track elementaries. They would send their students to Smart Junior High. Smart students would predominantly go to West or Central. Eisenhower, Garfield, and McKinley would be 4-track elementaries. Those 4-track elementaries would send their students to Sudlow as a 6-8 junior high. Those Sudlow students would then go to Central High School, and then Mid-City still remains an option as our alternative. So in this particular instance, Buchanan in the kind of the northwest portion of town and Washington in the east portion of town would close. The other buildings would remain open and usable. That is a big, complicated mess that's hard to wrap your head around. It's really hard when you have to say a building closes. If we all take our gut reaction, a lot of us want to say, no, don't close my building. And then we have to say, okay, then which one does close? So that's a really hard one. If anybody needs to go back and have any of these are 2 pathways. We've spent a lot of time tonight wrapping our heads around the K4-5-8 model. But again, these are 2 separate different pathways that have 2 totally different implications to the district. it would be really great if you guys could spend just a little bit of time talking about this. And again, we'll come back as a group and talk. So if we could take, 5 to 10 minutes again and talk, we'll come back together. Okay, I'm going to call a 1-minute warning.
Positive feedback.
Your alarm went off. Your alarm went off. I turned it off for you. All right. For anybody that's sticking around, why don't we just throw out some discussion. I'm horribly curious. I've heard a lot of comments from Walcott people. Can I get a show of hands who's from Walcott? All right, that's the majority of the room. Is the number one reason? So is the general, because I think we've heard it in different ways, but is the general thought that from the Walcott Bluegrass Buffalo perspective, you guys feel that it's better to stay as Buffalo Bluegrass as elementaries and Walcott as a K-8? Is that okay? Yeah.
I grew up at probably as far out as on the true west end. I'll always consider myself that. It was 22 miles for me to go to Davenport West High School every day. Now, if I was a kindergartner and I rode that bus route to Walcott, now I got to either get on that bus or a different bus and ride another 6 miles. I have the possibility to be on that bus 25 minutes, half hour, maybe even an hour. You know, and now did you take any consideration of that kindergartner, first grader, third grader, all that? Did you take any consideration of that?
Yeah. So we haven't even gotten to busing yet. It is.
You're not going to have them kids there.
Yeah. No, that is huge. That's why we're not anything to recommend to the board yet, because that still has to get factored in. I came from rural Illinois, where my bus ride was an hour and 15 minutes, from one end of a county to another. So I understand that. Yeah, the busing is a factor. Yeah.
So yes, we have a software that allows us to see where every one of our students lives and inside the area. So we did look at that and the limitations that it would take to get on a bus to go from that section down to Bluegrass. We did look at that, and we do believe that we can make that in the time. It would be a long time on a bus, but it wouldn't exceed the state's limits.
Which is?
I think it's an hour. Is that right, Josh?
So I'm just gonna speak to like the Jackson and Smart thing. So I live right across the street from Jackson, and there's absolutely no sidewalks, nothing that connects Wisconsin to Locust sidewalks. Safety wise, that would be a lot of like public city things that need to change. And how many students? I mean, I went to Jackson, Smart, and West, and 80% of my classmates walk to school every day. So it would be a huge problem with attendance that we already have, because the kids wouldn't be able to get themselves to school. They'd have to rely on something else, and their parents would have to worry about it when they're already, worrying about all these other things. It's just, there's a reason why Smart's there. It's in the neighborhood. Everybody is able to commute there appropriately. It's just Jackson. It's just not really realistic for that population of people if they can't walk there. There's nothing on Wisconsin or Telegraph.
So you're speaking to if Smart was to relocate elsewhere. Okay, no, that's good to know. So from a design perspective, we're exploring what does it take to keep Smart where it's at? What would it take to move Smart to a different location? It also changes the catchment of how are you moving, as TJ noted, using some logistical software. What does that change the catchment? Because likely what happens with any of these moves is you're changing the attendance boundaries. And so all of that becomes a dynamic exploration. Yeah.
In 5th grade, I couldn't walk to school because there were no sidewalks or cross guards. So, I mean, I'm that close, like literally 3 minutes away, and I can't safely get there, you know?
Yeah, no, that's very good. So the impact of what happens if Bluegrass, Buffalo, and Walcott remain as is can be explored. What that means is that changes how the elementaries and junior highs have to organize differently once you get inside, more or less, once you get inside, just inside the 280 corridor. Some of the students that live just inside a 280 do attend outward to those schools. So it's figuring out what does that population change, what does that student count look like where that attendance boundary occurs, and then how does that start to change what a pathway looks like differently.
I probably am not going to be well liked after saying this, but I'm the principal at Bluegrass Elementary School, and we have 322 students enrolled for this school year. They're phenomenal kids. There were 2 of them sitting at the middle table over there by Eric Johnson tonight. I love the school. The community is extraordinary, but our resources continue to dwindle because we are not a 400, 500 plus school, and it's hard. Our specialist teachers are now going to have to travel. We don't have a full-time nurse. We don't have a reading coach. I mean, there's a lot of things that are kind of exciting from a staff member's standpoint, just to think about we might actually get some of these awesome resources that we could really benefit from. So I understand it's hard, but I just want people to know that if things were to change, there would be some exciting things with it as well.
If I could just ask a question, if you look at it that way, does that mean hypothetically Walcott remains a K-8? Does there need to be an exploration of a different kind of elementary school solution to better pool resources outside of the town of Walcott? I mean, is that okay? It's that Sure.
I mean, we took care of the Davenport School District before, now you're doing this?
Yeah, no, that's all fair. That's very fair.
Maybe I got a ruffled feather and
Yeah.
look at.
Well, that's why you're here tonight. I mean, literally, that's why we want you here tonight, because it's one thing to look at it on paper. It's another to have to understand the experience of what influences that change or what is a ramification if that change occurs. So
Something we talked about at our table that we were curious about because it hasn't been brought up is the financial ramifications. So, I mean, it is an important part to this because ultimately, who's going to be paying for this? And one on paper may look like a better option, but the cost to all of us financially might just be too much. I mean, so that's a big point that I'm thinking about in my head is that trade-off of things.
yeah, so I can speak to that, and then actually our next segment is to talk about finance. If you want to stick around, I promise it's a much shorter number of slides than what I've given you. So the K458 option is a higher investment cost to make it happen. It's just going to cost more money to make that change. It will produce a longer term operational savings from the district. So you have to look at how the money flows to understand if that's good or bad in the district. If you cut from 17 elementaries to 12, you're cutting 5 buildings, which is cutting more than $1 million. I mean, you're likely saving a couple $1 million annually over the course of 10 years. You've just saved the cost of an investment in one of the remaining buildings. So it is a bit of a trade-off. It's a lot of money. We don't know if we can afford it or not. The second option, the K5, 6, 8, is a much lower cost of entry to implement and will yield less savings over time, but if it's handled appropriately, would still help spread some of the funding that goes to the different buildings to help those buildings create more equity for the students in there. So the total cost of any project is likely not attainable in a one-shot deal. So if the district said, we really like option X, nobody can afford to do that in one shot. It just is logistically impossible. Everything has to happen in an order of sequence, partially because we have to be able to accommodate being able to teach students while we're making these changes. And then we have to be able to make sure that the funds are distributed appropriately so we can afford to keep making these changes. So what happens is this is going to be a phased approach where things happen sequentially. Likely, if you're a parent of a junior high student right now, you likely won't see that change happening for your students until they're in high school. So we're talking about preparing these buildings for the generations that are coming. And yes, it will still impact your students, but this is a long-term proposition. What that first phase looks like, I can't tell you. We're still doing financial investigation on that to know what that looks like. But it is going to be a sequenced approach, and it will take some time. Just real quick before we jump ahead, we had a lot of people from the Walcott, Bluegrass, Buffalo. Is there anybody from elsewhere that just had any thoughts they wanted to share or?
I just graduated from West, so I'm more concerned about the high school thing, and I think it's great that everybody can go to whatever school they want, whatever floats their boat, whatever they want. I just really question the necessity for the physical building of Mid-City because it's an alternative specialized education, right? That's what the building's for and meant there or whatever. But we already have that like within the high schools. We have a BD hallway, we have a special ed hallway. Like we already have those alternative education things or like a mini like school within a school. They function on their own schedules. It's already in the buildings, so it's just confusing me why we have a whole nother building or like either what I think would we could either move all the kids that are currently in North Central and West that are getting that not generalized scheduling to move them all to Mid-City or just move all the Mid-City kids into their respective high schools that they want to be in.
That's the very subject of current conversation. So more to come on that. But Mid-City needs to be understood as to what its component is at the high school level and how does that work with how the high schools should be improved, because let's face it, our high schools do need an investment as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Wow, I got the green light. As somebody who worked at Mid-City and then later went to Central to work with the at-risk population, Mid-City, and I didn't know it when I went there, and every time I told somebody, I work at the alternative school. Mid-City is a very unique alternative school, and as the gentleman, Dr. Jake Clips, who kind of started that, he said, they just don't fit in regular school. It wasn't all behavior kids. They didn't fit in because of maybe some mental health issues. They got anxiety. Maybe they were bullied at their high school. They struggled with their sexuality. They struggled. They had the daycare there. So all the teen moms went there. I think people, when they hear Mid-City alternative, that nobody will ever be lucky to get out of high school and do anything. We had college-bound students there. It's really kind of a unique unicorn kind of place, and it's a very special place for the kids that are there. And I would strongly, I know that it's, probably an expensive school per student, but there's a lot of additional supports there that they will not get at any other high school. The at-risk program that I was in is probably more behavior. It's not necessarily somebody who's been bullied or anxiety. It's a totally separate program where these are students that have fallen behind in credits. They're not fitting into the school, they're skipping class. And now we're trying to play catch up to get them caught back up and on cycle to graduate on time. So they don't really have that mid-city experience at the other high schools. So yeah, mid-city is a very unique place. And when you hear the word alternative high school, it's not, and it wasn't, I mean, Kimberly Center was going on when we had mid-city, and that was really more of a behavioral lockdown setting. So mid-city is a place that is there for students who just aren't fitting into a traditional high school setting. So it's a bit of a different, when we say alternative, it's a little bit more unique or different terminology than what you might typically think of alternative school. I understand what you're saying, but when you kind of see the inside of it, it's a little different.
Thanks. We've been at this a long time. Is Suzanne still with us? I'd like to just turn the floor to her for a few minutes.
Yes, I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
You are good to go.
Okay, well, I will share my screen. I promise I have just a few slides. Not, let me see, where is my, 1 second, where is screen 2? Hang on, 1 second. All right. I don't know if anybody, can you see my screen? I'm trying to share.
There we go.
Okay. So gonna go through the Finance 101 section. So I'm going to start with some very basic Iowa school funding. For Iowa, any school district that's a public school in the state of Iowa, there are those 5 primary sources of revenue: the sales tax, right, that statewide penny program that comes in. Then we have the federal funds and the state aid that come into the general fund. We have property taxes that go into a lot of different buckets, including the general fund, the management fund, the Pearl fund, the debt service fund, if the district has a debt service levy, the PEPL fund, that is a board-approved PEPL and a voted PEPL. And then we have the instructional support levy, and then we have an income surtax that will go to the instructional support levy and the voted PEPL levy. So this is just a, sort of a 101 sort of slide here that talks about sort of the sources and what buckets, I call these buckets, right? So every green bucket where the funds go into have specific rules about what the dollars that go into that bucket, what they can be spent for. Now, this is just kind of breaking it up between operating costs and capital costs, because we're talking a lot tonight about the capital programs. So I want to make it very clear that the general fund covers the operating costs, right? And operating costs include salaries and benefits for teachers, administrators, staff. Operating costs include curriculum, supplies, and other educational needs. It includes utilities and general operations of the buildings. So operating costs are primarily paid by the general fund. And roughly 80% of general fund expenditures are related to salaries and benefits. And that's just a statewide average, not specific to the district. Now, the general fund is intended to be used for operations. So we have to look to other places when we're funding the capital costs, right? So capital costs include buildings, building and maintaining school facilities, includes school buildings, parking lots, roofs, all of that sort of thing. Large capital equipment purchases, that can be anything from musical instruments to sports equipment, to HVAC, heating and cooling, all of that sort of thing, any capital equipment, and athletic facilities in those related sites. So there are three primary sources of funding for all of the different capital projects, and depending on which way we go, which plan the district chooses will have a different price tag. So I'm just going to look tonight at what those three primary areas we have to pay for those projects, right? We have that statewide penny that is specifically for capital projects. You can pay for some different things with that, but it's pretty restricted and it's specifically for capital. We'll talk about that specifically on the following slides. PEPL. PEPL means property, plant, and equipment levy. So that's property, it's plant, and it's equipment. So specific uses for the PEPL funds that come into the district. And then the third option is general obligation bonds that are paid for by a debt service levy tax, right? So those are the three primary options available to the district. So first is the statewide penny. It's also called SAVE, and SAVE stands for Secure and Advanced Vision for Education, which is a fancy term the state uses to talk about the SAVE program. The statewide penny is imposed on all 99 counties throughout the state of Iowa, and it is distributed on a per pupil basis. So it's the statewide collections. It's estimated every year. The total student population based on the certified enrollment from the prior October is how it's distributed, so that every student in the state of Iowa gets the same dollars per student for every school district in the state of Iowa. Now, how that statewide penny can be spent is decided district by district by the voters. The district puts forward what's called a revenue purpose statement, and that is something that the voters of every school district have to approve. Without a revenue purpose statement, all that the SAVE funds can be used for is property tax relief. So for Davenport schools, the last revenue purpose statement was brought to voters in September 10th of 2013, and that one expires December 31st of 2029. And on the slide, I'm not going to read it all, but it lists 6 main things that it's pretty much anything that's capital. So it's a long list of remodel, repair, expand, facilities, leases, purchase of equipment, transportation, recreation, technology, emergency repairs, structural, plumbing, mechanical, all that kind of stuff, and to pay for debt service if you want to issue revenue bonds that are paid back with the statewide penny sales tax. Now, specifically for Davenport schools, how much does the Davenport schools receive per year? Well, for fiscal 22 that we just ended, the statewide funding per pupil was $1,116 per pupil. So based on current, that would have been October 2020 enrollment, the district received 17.5, roughly 17,490,000. And so the FY23 revenues will be distributed later this month. But from a cash flow perspective, PFM has a really handy dandy cash flow that I'm not going to go through tonight. We're just doing a high level review tonight. But we made some assumptions what 23 looks like and going forward to figure out, okay, how much could the district afford if they wanted to borrow against the SAVE program and still maintain enough cash annually to pay for technology and other scheduled capital outlays that are funded out of the SAVE fund. So we assumed 1% growth in that statewide average. It's grown a lot faster historically, but knowing that the economy has been slowing and everybody's talking about inflation, the impact of inflation, that inflation, the expense of goods sold is rising faster than salaries are rising. So just assuming 1% growth to be conservative in that statewide average. And we're also being conservative with future enrollment projections. We talked a little bit about that tonight. We're assuming 200 students are leaving the district, or a decline in enrollment of 200 students per year. And so looking at how much of that 17.49 million is sort of already dedicated or already spent out of that cash flow, there is 2 series of bonds that are currently outstanding. One matures in fiscal 23 and the second matures in 24. So in this upcoming fiscal year in June of 2023, 23, the district will spend $2.4 million on debt service for the 2 series of bonds. And then the following fiscal year, in fiscal 24, there's only $1.2 million, and then there's zero. In 25 forward, there's zero principal and interest due on any outstanding bonds. We've also reserved about $7 million a year for technology, other scheduled capital outlays that sort of, it varies year to year based on, roof projects and what's scheduled to be done each year, but around $3 million a year in technology, $2.5 million in capital outlays on average, and then that debt service. So PFM estimates that there is at least $100 million that would be available to fund some of these projects from the SAVE Fund before we ever talk about levying or going to voters for a referendum for a GO bond or for levying a property tax in addition to what's already available. So that's exciting to know. $100 million sounds like a lot, but just for some context, some of the planning numbers that we're using, a middle school, we're estimating around $62 million if you were to build a new one. Depending on the elementary, the scope, that's going to change if we're doing a K4 or a K5, but using a planning number around $40 million. So $100 million sounds like a lot, but those are the kind of numbers we're talking about if we're building new facilities or doing substantial improvements and additions to existing facilities. So that was SAVE. That's the statewide penny. That's the revenue that comes into the district on that per pupil basis. The second thing I want to talk a little bit about is PEPL. So PEPL, there are 2 different tax rates that are currently levied that are associated with PEPL that can be spent for property, plant, and equipment, or for debt service for a GO bond that is paid for by PEPL. The board approved PEPL levy rate for the district is 33 cents, and that's currently levied. There's also a voted PEPL levy that the voters of the district have authorized through June 30th of 2029. That's $1.34. Now that's a 10-year levy, and so you can borrow against that and pay it back with that $1.34. You can spend 100% of that $1.34 for GO bond debt service paid for by the PEPL, but it has to be with the last maturity in 29 because that's when the current levy rate expires, and it can only be for the $1.34, not for the 33 cents. So how much does the Davenport School District collect in PEPL revenues right now? For the total $1.64, it's about 8.5, almost $8.6 million a year. That's on the total $1.64, and that's based on a taxable valuation that has just over $5.1 billion tax base. When we're talking about a tax levy, it's going to be the taxable valuation divided by 1,000 times the tax rate. So whether it's PEPL or whether it's a GO bond tax levy rate, it's the taxable valuation divided by $1,000 times the tax rate. It's going to give you the revenues generated by that tax. And so in this case, PEPL generates about $8.6 million per year. There's no debt currently paid for out of the PEPL fund, but there are scheduled capital outlays. There's about $2 million that go to support services and about $5 million that are scheduled in the CIP for ongoing capital needs. Again, those are your recurring, music, instruments, roofs, whatever, HVAC, whatever is scheduled that's usually paid for by PEPL. Now, the voted PEPL levy that can be leveraged 100% is $6.8 million of that. So, as you can see, if we were going to leverage that $6.8 million for debt service, obviously, if we have $8.5 million, we can't do the $7 million annually. So it would be a little bit of a trade-off for what's available for debt service versus what's kind of pay as you go. But if we leveraged all of that $6.8 million, there's another $35 million available for funding projects between fiscal 23 and June 30th, 2029, just over that period there that could be leveraged to also fund projects before ever going to a GO bond vote. So between SAVE and PEPL, about $135 million of capacity before we go to a GO bond. But if we're really going to make some massive moves in the district, and these are some bold plans that you've heard about tonight, then they are going to require some sort of a GO bond vote. And how much exactly, we don't know. We're still going through the plan. It'll depend on which plan is selected. And that's what Bray Architect and that team will help us figure out, is how much exactly is the price tag for each one of those options. But a little bit of background about GO bonds. GO bonds have to be voter approved, and they require a supermajority approval, which means it has to approve by 60% or more. GO bonds cannot exceed a 20-year term, and they are paid for by a debt service levy tax rate. Now, there's a $2.70 levy rate cap per $1,000 of valuation for school districts in the state of Iowa. The district could ask voters to go to a second ballot question and ask for a $4.05 tax levy rate. So it'd be two different questions, right? The first question would be, can I issue bonds in this amount? And if those bonds require more than a $2.70 tax rate, there would be a second question on the ballot that would require a supermajority as well. And so, the bonds, you're approving a maximum amount of principal amount of bonds to be issued. And if the total payment goes over $2.70, second ballot question, can we go to $4.05? Both require supermajority. Now, GO bonds can be abated or paid for by SAVE funds. So when the district does its budget annually, it can have GO bonds outstanding, but if the SAVE revenues exceed PFM's estimates and there's cash in the SAVE fund, the district could, if they choose in their budget process, that's a school board annual budget decision, they could abate those GO bonds with SAVE. There are school districts in Iowa that choose to abate their GO bonds with SAVE funds if they're available. And also, GO bonds can be paid off early with cash after what's called their call date. Unlike your mortgage that you can refinance at any time that you want to pay the fee, municipal bonds that the school would issue can only be called or refunded after 8 to 10 years. And that call date is set at the time the GO bonds are issued. PFM usually does an 8-year call when we do GO bonds. So you can't pay off or prepay or refund for a lower interest rate until at least after that call date, which is usually 8 years down the road. So just because the district is issuing 20-year bonds doesn't necessarily mean those bonds will all be outstanding for 20 years and that tax rate will stay at, say, a 270. If that's where we end up, it doesn't mean they'll stay at a 270 because as the taxable valuation increases over time, the levy will drop automatically unless new debt is added. So when we look at the Davenport School District, right? So there's two components when we think about issuing new debt. And the first thing we need to talk about is the legal limit. There is a legal limit to how much debt the school district can have outstanding at any time in the state of Iowa. That constitutional or legal debt limit is equal to 5% of the 100% assessed value of the school district. Now, we talked a little bit about how tax revenue is generated. It's taxable valuation divided by 1,000 times the tax rate. Well, assessed value is I don't want to get into valuation 101 in Iowa here, but assessed value is what the county assessor or the city assessor assesses your property value at. And then there is a rollback applied by the auditor for each type of property class that gets you your taxable valuation. So taxable valuation is a calculation, not the assessed value of each property. And it is assessed value that is used to calculate the legal debt limit. And so for, it was a $5 billion taxable valuation for the district, but the 100% assessed value before applying the rollbacks is $8.3 million. So pretty big difference. Residential rollbacks are roughly 54%. So of your assessed value as a homeowner for residential property, you're only paying 54% of your assessed value and your taxable value. And taxable value is what's used to calculate your tax rate. But for debt limit, it's assessed value. Now, there are 4 kinds of debt that count against a district's legal limit. GO bonds that are voter approved, PEPL, GO capital loan notes, if those are issued and paid for with that $1.34 voted PEPL levy, SAVE revenue bonds, even though they are not paid by taxes, but are paid by that 1 cent sales tax statewide and are technically revenue bonds. The state of Iowa hasn't declared that they don't count against the school district's legal debt capacity, so that means that they do. And then the 4th type of debt that counts against that legal capacity is a capital lease. So if the district had a capital lease for buses or copiers or mowers or Apple leases or Chromebook leases for technology, any of those capital leases would count against that legal debt limit. So The legal debt limit for all of the debt that can be outstanding at one time based on the current assessed value of $8.2 billion is $413,879,000. So $413 million is the legal debt limit. That's not talking about affordability. That's talking about the maximum amount of all debt that can be outstanding at any time. And the district has those two series of save revenue bonds that mature, one in 23, one in 24, 3.5 million of principal outstanding right now, which yields a net legal debt capacity available today of $410 million. So that's the legal capacity. Now, when we talk about affordability, okay, so this is the debt service levy. So now when we're talking about a tax levy, we're back to taxable valuation. We're back to the $4.1 billion tax base. So again, we talked about that 270 is the first limit. Without voter approval, $2.70 is the most the district can levy for a GO bond. And so I took the liberty of saying, okay, if you did half of that, right, if the district did $1.35 in the debt service levy, how many dollars are generated to fund projects? Around just over $87 million if the district was to levy $1.35. If we went all the way to the $2.70 debt service levy rate, almost $175 million of funding available for projects. And just before, just for giggles, if we went all the way to the 405, I estimate there would be $265 million available. So, doing some quick math, 265, which maxes out the 405, requires 2 ballot supermajority approvals by the voter, plus $100 million in save, plus the $35 million, then we are talking about being really close to that legal debt limit. And so, it's just all about the plan, right? It's all about the plan and how much the price tag is. But those are sort of the capacity issues. And so that's it for my section of slides, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
And the moral of the story is Davenport School District has an incredible ability to borrow or generate funds to the tune of that $410 million, but they still cannot afford to purchase Jeff Bezos's yacht. So sorry, that's my dad joke of the night. No, this is really good information because not everybody understands where the fund stream comes to help pay for these changes. There will have to be careful consideration about how do you start to pool projects together to accommodate these changes in a way that's both palatable to the community and achievable in a tangible way. So money will become a deciding factor that the board uses for strategizing how to implement these changes in the district, and that will influence the way the projects are phased or sequenced into place. So we are not prepared at this point to jump into how does that look right now, other than we know that to do everything in one shot out of the gate is unaffordable. So coming up with a realistic strategy is part of this process, and we will determine that over the next few weeks, actually. So if we want to switch back just to the end of our presentation, I do want to thank you all for coming. This has been well over, closer to 3 hours than 2. You guys have stuck it out. For the online viewers and the people in this room, we have 14,000 students in this district, well over 200,000 households in this district, and you're representing the small few that care enough to come and sit with us and talk about the good and the bad and the ugly of all this, because it's not an easy and hard, not a really simple process to just unfold. So next steps. There is a meeting in 2 weeks. It's going to be the same presentation. Tell your family, tell your friends, get the word out. The more people that we can have sit with us, the better, because it just helps us understand what people's thoughts are as we look at this. In the coming month or month and a half, a survey is going to show up in your mailbox. This is going to every single household in the district. So that giant boundary that's everywhere, everybody's going to get a survey. It's an 8-page document. It's going to speak more to the information that we presented tonight, seeking back information to further help the board understand the community's thoughts on this whole process and where the district should start to align. If we jump forward, on our board website, there is comment opportunities. So there is an ability to log in and put your ideas, your comments, your concerns on paper. We encourage that to happen because just talking to TJ earlier today, he looks at every comment that comes through. And so those comments are important. For anybody at the table that's written on the sheet of paper in front of you when you leave, feel free to leave it at your table. We'll swing by and pick it up. For any of the questions that are there, we will be generating a FAQ page on the website so that people can go in and see how we respond to that. We will try to categorize those so that all the similar questions have a category that gets answered. With that, I'm going to let TJ close us out.
Well, real quick, thank you for being here. Means more than you know. The feedback is much appreciated. And for our last words, our board president would like to close us out as well.
As Superintendent Schneckloff said, I am Dan Gose. I'm the board president. I am a proud product of Davenport Schools. And I can finally say I have 4 kids in the district, a kindergartner, 4th grader, sophomore, and a senior. My wife and I are nuts, I get it. But as you all can see, this is a huge task. And on behalf of the board, we had 3 board members here tonight. We greatly appreciate all of your input and feedback and helping us with this process. We only have discussions after we've gathered feedback from all of you after each meeting, and we kind of go over that. So the board has no notion one way or the other, and that's why we've included everybody, because this is a huge deal to move our district forward. And thank you all very much for staying so late. It was worth the 8-hour drive home tonight to come and sit, so I'd rather come hang out with all of you and do this than go home to my wife and kids. So I'm being a little bit of trouble later, but thanks. But again, thank you all so much. We greatly appreciate it, and how much you care about the district and your kids and your buildings in the district, because you're here to advocate for them. So thank you all very much. Everybody drive safe and have a great night.